Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our afternoon sessions of the LSX World Congress today. Delighted to be introducing our next panel session focused on early stage partnering for broad platform companies. Please do continue to ask your questions for our panel and across the wider event. So you'll see the chat and questions function still on the right-hand side. If you have any questions during the presentation or indeed afterwards, please do ask them in that chat and questions function and we can come to them over the course of the event. But for now, it's delighted to hand you over to our host and moderator for this session, Ed Saltaman. Ed, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you to the organizers and to LSX and to all my panelists. I'm thrilled to have this discussion. It's not a discussion we have very often, and it's a discussion I think we'll be seeing more and more as we continue to innovate off novel platforms for the next, for the next foreseeable future. By the way, as Josh said, I'm Ed Saltaman. I'm the executive chairman of Cello Health Bioconsulting, a company that I founded previously as Defined Health and sold to Cello in 2017. I spend a lot of my time working strategically with early stage companies on increasing value and de-risking early stage science through strategic development. I'm joined on this panel by three terrific external companies that one of which I'm thrilled to, two of which actually I'm thrilled to announce are clients. As well as one I hope to be, and also Beth Fordham-Meier, who is one of us at Cello Health Bioconsulting, and I'll allow everybody to very briefly introduce themselves, and then I'd like you to actually just, when I ask the panelists to very quickly describe their platform. There's obviously going to be a lot more information online. I've asked them to avoid giving the pitch deck. And simply give the 60,000 foot, if you will, view. And I think with that, we'll then move on to some very specific questions around the topic of this panel. But let me start by kicking off by saying that I think we're in a new version of partnering. We're in partnering maybe V2 or V3 or V4, depending on how long you want to go back. In this dance between biotechnology companies, particularly early stage companies, and large pharma. If you consolidate a lot of what V1 was, it's easy to forget actually that this era we're living in, where about 90% of the work we do, and I would guess, although I am not certain, but I think it's probably a barometer, that 75 or 80% of the venture capital that's going into early stage companies significantly is going into platform companies. And if you had predicted that 7 or 8 years ago, you'd probably be regarded as pretty good at predicting things because, platform companies didn't want to be touched by venture capitalists just a short time ago. They wanted product companies. Platform companies were those that investors looked at as a marvelous opportunity to have scientists playing in a sandbox, blowing up value. But we have come to a new generation of platform companies, and the platform companies that we work with all suffer from a nice problem to have, which is they do need to partner. They probably do need to partner relatively early, but they need to partner strategically, okay? If you look at the first, second, third generation of partnering, it was less strategic than transactional. It was less associated with company growth, okay, and getting the company to the next stage than it was with raising non-dilutive capital. It was less associated with focusing on particular diseases or indications or therapeutic area strategy than it was, on terms of just, like I said, validation. A lot of it was dressing up a company prior to an IPO while trying not to encumber the company. So there's been a long history of deals and these dances between what we used to call the flea and the elephant. But biotech, two things have happened. One, biotech is forever the innovation engine for large pharma. It's the innovation engine for biotech, but it's also, frankly, the innovation engine for large pharma. And the value of early stage innovation has increased exponentially, absolutely exponentially. But so has the challenge of how you leverage your platform and how you leverage, the innovation that you are sitting on to create the next multi-billion-dollar company, all right? That not insignificantly is bringing breakthrough therapies to patients. So that's what we're going to discuss in a short period of time. And what I'm going to do is turn it to my panelists, ask them to just say hello, so you know who they are. Very briefly describe the company, and then I'll come back with a specific question for all of them, and we'll get the discussion going that way. Okay, so Yochi, you're actually first in my screen, so I'll call on you first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, hi. Yochi Slonim, co-founder and CEO of Anima Biotech. Our translation-controlled therapeutics platform discovers small molecule drugs that selectively control the translation of mRNA as a new strategy against many undruggable and hard targets.
Great, thank you. Adam?
Yes, thanks, Ed, and thanks, LSX, for having us on. So I'm the CEO of Nodthera. Nodthera works in the NLRP3 inflammasome space, so it's sort of an interesting angle on platform. Rather than having a technology, we actually have a target that has broad applicability over a number of different indications, both peripheral inflammatory conditions as well as neurological, and we have a number of small molecule chemistries that we're positioning for those different indications. So a platform, but exploring the breadth of the biological opportunity here across multiple diseases.
Sure, great. Sharon?
Hi, thanks for having us. My name is Sharon Benzeno. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer at Adaptive. Adaptive is a publicly traded commercial stage company. We're really powering the age of immune medicine. Our mission is to translate the genetic code of the adaptive immune system into next generation clinical diagnostics and improved therapeutics. We do that by sequencing and having a platform that we've built for the past decade that allows us to really quantify and accurately and specifically measure the adaptive immune system, specifically T cell and B cell receptors, to apply in the diagnostics and therapeutics applications.
Thanks, that's great. And Beth, you want to just say hello and introduce yourself briefly, and I'll bring you back into the conversation in a minute.
Certainly, yes. Beth Fordham-Meier, Vice President of Business Development with Cello Health Bioconsulting. I am a biopharma deal maker and transactionalist, and my industry experience included working for a nicotinic platform company where partnering was part of our corporate growth strategy. And I had the partnering strategy and support practice at Cello Health Bioconsulting to provide advice on partnering and corporate development strategy to our clients. Pleasure to be here. Great.
Okay, now we've set the stage, so we're gonna jump right into it. All right, given the the sort of the landscape that I set forth with, I'm pretty sure nobody here disagrees with. I mean, I'm reasonably confident that's a fact, so I'm not going to actually ask that question. Well, what I'm going to do is say, since I think you've all considered partnering, some of you are quite far along in the partnering development, and also in the case of Sharon, we certainly have a multi-billion-dollar public company here that's late stage in some regard, but Sharon, as you'll point out, I will point out is early stage in terms of the development of the actual therapeutic pipeline. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into this. But going from where you are, from the stage that you are, okay, and looking towards the future, what do you think as you talk with partners and you think about partnering? And we don't have to limit it to just pharma companies. We can talk about academic center partnering, we can talk about all kinds of different partnerships, but the center, I think, is large pharma. What do you see to be the largest challenges that you face, okay? And one I know that most companies have at the early stage, so we don't have to spend a lot of time with that, is we don't have clinical data, all right? So that's something that really has not really changed that much in pharma. They still, voraciously want to devour clinical data, the later the better. But given where you are, what do you see as the biggest challenge in partnering from a platform as broad and powerful as each of you have? So with that, I think, and not simply because I'm in the same order, but Yochi, you have an incredibly broadly applicable platform, okay, in the RNA field. So let me start with you, and we'll go through the panel.
So I would say the interesting thing, by the way, we are in the mRNA field. Now, this is a field that has, it's not new. The word mRNA is actually among the three most basic words of biology. You have the DNA, you have the mRNA, and you have the protein. And as far as 30-something years ago, companies have been declaring this to be the next gold mine, where they can mine new drugs. This goes back to the RNAi companies. And indeed, after 30-something years, they started to find some gold, and there are a couple of drugs in the market. But for the most part, I would say pharmas have missed that kind of train. And now they are running after those assets. So if you are in and I'm saying this as an introduction because it's interesting that even if you are in a very hot area, and by the way, the word mRNA today is the hottest word. Yeah. Like everybody knows about mRNA because of the coronavirus vaccines. But still, the biggest challenge is that this is still, from a pharma point of view, if you want to do it with small molecules, as we do, not RNAi, not related to vaccines, this is just a new way, a new strategy for drugs. It's new technology. And the biggest challenge that you have always with a platform is that if it's innovative, then it's new. And if it's new, then it's unproven. And then you don't have data. So how do you get this whole thing started? I mean, without data, you cannot get started with pharma. And you need to find visionaries like we found in Lilly. Right? People that are actually, they have a need, they have some targets that are really, really challenging. And then you go with your technology and you basically start very early on. I would say to get started as a platform company, it's never too early to start. Right. I remember pitching my platform when we had zero data, we had no pipeline, and we had no partnerships. So the questions that I was getting were like, so tell us about the molecules that you've discovered with the platform. I said, no molecules yet. This is why we're talking to you guys. Right. We can discover them for you. And say, no, but so give us somebody else that you've discovered it for. Say, no, there is nobody else. This is why we are talking to you. Right. So in principle, the whole thing is that you need to get started by finding a visionary. It's just like any other market. I've been in software companies before my career in biotech. You need to find somebody that is visionary, that can appreciate the technology that you have. You start there. The biggest trap is to think that everybody is visionary, and because your platform is so broad, you can talk to everybody. It's not about what your platform can do in the beginning, it's about whom you're talking to. And that's I would say, the first step as a platform company to consider, whom are you going to talk to?
Okay, thank you. It's a really good setup. I'm gonna come back and explore a little bit around because the early stage. So you're probably the earliest stage company that we have on the panel here, with a very, very broad platform. So I anticipated some of what your answer would be, which is a great answer. But I think that I've always worked with early stage companies and said, listen, we can't change the fact that you're early. Okay, the early is where you are. The issue is we can't manufacture data. But as we tend to think of it, and as I go to the other panelists, to think about not simply the challenge of the absence of data, but the challenge of once you have data, the challenge of breadth of platform. How do you deal with the breadth of that platform? And I'm going to come back to you on that because you have a very, very wide platform, widely applicable platform. So I'm going to go in the order that I see, which is very uncreative. I'm sorry, but I'm going to go to Adam next.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge and the opportunity with partnering platform companies is when to partner and then how to partner, in addition to what Yochi brought up, which is who to partner with. and when to partner is a classic challenge for CEOs, trying to balance financing strategy, validation of the platform through an early partnership versus holding on to certain rights, developing data further, getting different economics the further you push a product into development. So, I think that you see companies really making choices around, are we going to try and keep our portfolio intact, add value ourselves to certain data inflection points and then partner, or are we deliberately looking for an early partnering strategy to actually unload some of the opportunity into a partnership for others to take forward while we retain certain rights? So Nodthera specifically, we've taken the decision that we will do what we are good at, which is discover small molecule chemistry, advance that through discovery, preclinical development, into early development to get PK, PD data, as well as potentially early efficacy data. And then we really will need to partner, because to fully exploit the opportunity in terms of the breadth, but also the real expertise that pharma brings in terms of global reach and therapeutic area, clinical development expertise, etc. We will need to partner. But we've decided to take that second view, which is let's continue to add value ourselves. And then maybe in a moment we can talk about how to partner in terms of what sort of deal structures and participatory rights small companies can expect or would like to see. But I think the first primary question is, when do you want to partner your assets?
Right. That's great. Thank you, Adam. We'll come back on that. Sharon, as we discussed in a pre-call, you clearly have one of the, it's not only a very broad platform, but it's a platform that has both diagnostic and ultimately therapeutic applications, and has represented a really good opportunity to monetize as well as to partner. But again, within that context, how do you think about partnering strategy at the stage you're at? And what are the obstacles you think you see? What are the biggest headwinds?
Yeah, and to build off of what Yochi and Adam said, so when to partner, and maybe just some background, I mentioned it in the intro, we've spent deliberately the last 10 years really building out the platform so that we can have optionality and different directions to go. So at the stage we're at, partnering is really a growth strategy that allows us to monetize on the platform, importantly, with near-term and long-term goals, but also to accelerate innovations that on our own would take likely longer. And so where we are within that growth strategy, some of the challenges are also opportunities, but I think the guiding principles are being very clear in defining our own business objectives and aligning and incentivizing a partnership to meet those objectives and ensure there's complementary competencies in the partner that we select. And that is a challenge with, of course, competing priorities. Adam mentioned some trade-offs potentially, but really it's aligning on sort of the bigger picture. And then more importantly, whether you're early stage or late stage, the key is really seeing eye to eye on the science and what we're trying to achieve jointly together in a counterparty.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to go to Beth, and Beth is going to, I think, give you a little bit. So if we say we have an N of 3 right now, in this broad world, we have a very small sample of platform companies. But at Cello Health Bioconsulting, we work across the spectrum for companies. The vast majority of the companies we work for are quite early stage. Most of them have not actually gotten to or maybe close to an IND. Most of them are at the preclinical stage, and that's where we're bringing in the strategy. So we see some of these challenges from, quite often across and that's why I wanted Beth to join the panel, because she leads that practice. So Beth, we want to make a few general observations around the challenges of partnering early off broad platforms.
Yeah, I think, all the panelists, I think, really commented on some key aspects when people are thinking strategically about partnering. And I want to emphasize thinking strategically about partnering, because I believe the right view of partnering is that it is a tool, a foundational tool, an important tool to actually advance your corporate development strategy. So you need to define who you are, who you want to be, what you're really good at, what is your highest and best use, and then define what kind of deals you want to do, with whom, when, and how. And so, that is echoing, points that the panelists have made. I think those are truisms across platform companies, across any company, and across any stage, because partnering is a strategic endeavor. We hear a lot of the need to validate a platform. And so early stage companies are confronted with the challenge of, how do I do a deal to validate my platform? But anytime we put control in the hands of a third party to validate ourselves, we're really handing over the wheel to someone else. So it's really important to think critically early about, what can I do to help accelerate the perception of value in my platform, short of clinical development. And so one has to really focus on preparing one's story and positioning in a way that resonates with the audience. So socializing early with those key opinion leaders, with those key stakeholders, I think is important for defining what does value look like to your target audience, so that you can design your programs to deliver value at the right time. And then thinking about what you want to be in terms of what you retain and in what you partner before you ever embark on those discussions. And I think, Sharon, you noted that it's really important to think about who you want to be, what you want to grow, what you want to retain, and then what the partner needs to look like to deliver, to augment that and to complement that. So I believe really these are universals in any partnering strategy, but especially with broad platform companies, because they have so much opportunity and they need to think very critically about how to leverage and optimize it.
Yeah, I want to reemphasize, I think that, and I'll go to the next question and sort of tee that up. I think that I want to just, at risk of being repetitive, just underscore that this change that's going on right now in biotech, from the move from investor preference to platform companies away from product companies, was both not easily predicted and has come to a far greater extent that I think would have been known. So even the actual prediction probably wouldn't have happened, but the degree to which it's shifted across all therapeutic areas is absolutely, I think very few people would have predicted that. I certainly know we didn't. But we're actually happy, because this is something that actually now forces the partnership out of simply a transactional activity, as I indicated earlier, and much more into a strategic growth driver, for the company. And it raises all kinds of questions. When it was a product company, the questions were fundamentally, who gets to keep what? Who gets to sell what? Who gets to book sales? We've had those kinds of questions. Those were ways to transfer off risk, okay? To get somebody who's going to bring commercial organization to it. But even the intersection of commercial organization right now, right, is used to sit and develop therapies and say, well, we're going to need a large pharma with an enormous commercial infrastructure and sales force, sort of flies in the face of where innovation is going right now, or at least a lot of it, which is going to increasingly individualized and personalized therapies and rare disease and complex platforms. Number two, there's an element of knowledge transfer in this, as all of your comments indicated. Large pharma, and I need to point this out repeatedly, large pharma really hasn't innovated any of the novel platforms that we are now dealing with, okay, across biotech. All right, so if you look at everything from bispecifics to adoptive cellular therapy to virally delivered gene therapies to gene editing, all of this has come from biotech. All of this has come from fundamentally venture-funded and eventually public-funded biotech companies. And so the other thing I will say is that the valuation of some of these companies at the earlier stage is far greater than it has been. So much money is flowing into the space. This is all a wonderful thing, but the obligation to have to actually retain value and inflect value early becomes of much more critical importance than it ever was before. So in setting that up, and I don't want to make this, like an essay question, but it kind of is, a very important subject. And at this point, our experience is boards are getting involved in this much, much earlier than they have before as well. All right. When the board would get involved at the point at which a deal needed to be sanctioned or approved, boards are increasingly involved in driving that strategy or being a key seat at the table in that strategy. So I didn't actually look. I know Sharon, you did a very large deal last year, just around JP Morgan time with Genentech. Congratulations on that. Adam, I don't actually think, I think you may have announced some collaborations. Yochi, you definitely have to deal with Lilly. One of the questions that we had been kicking around was this idea of what if you did a deal, what would you do differently the next time? Beth liked to call that seller's remorse, and I told her that people don't like to discuss seller's remorse at these forums. If we ever get out of a pandemic and we can go back to closing the evening in bars, then maybe we can hear more about seller's remorse. But in terms of just your experience, right? And if you haven't done deals that are relevant, we can move on to the next question. But what do you think you might have learned from a deal that you might have done differently? And since Sharon, I know you have done at least that one major deal, aside from a lot of other collaborations, I'm going to go to you first on my question.
Absolutely. So I think to avoid seller's remorse, again, coming back to the theme of being very strategic and selective in a partner, and doing the diligence and the hard work to make sure that, again, there's alignment on what we're trying to solve and solve together, that's complementary in core competencies and business objectives. And I think in the partnerships, so Genentech, we're actually kicking off our third year of the partnership, which is to advance, and we teamed up on the big challenge to advance truly transformative medicines based on T-cell receptors as cellular therapies in oncology. At the time, it was certainly a large deal, as you noted. Genentech paid Adaptive $300 million up front. We're eligible for more than $1.8 billion in regulatory development and commercial milestones, and there's significant royalties. And that's because we didn't sell, it wasn't transactional, and it's not transactional. It's truly to develop fully personalized medicines that we believe have curative potential. So that's a big challenge. That is also a long-term partnership to ensure that we, advance it methodically and really make a difference in patients' lives. That's one example. Our partnership with Microsoft, similarly, was to tackle the big challenge, but also the opportunity of mapping T cells to millions of antigens, disease by disease, that opens up for adaptive next-generation diagnostics, as well as target discovery that further fuels our therapeutics potential growth strategies. And then thirdly, also in the diagnostics realm, is partnering on our clonoSEQ test, which is the only FDA-approved MRD test, with different partners, where the alignment there really is to advance MRD as a clinical endpoint and ultimately potentially a surrogate endpoint to enable partners to accelerate approvals of their own drugs and make accessible novel innovative therapies to patients with blood cancers.
Great. Yochi, I'm going to come back. I'm going to go to you on this one, because I know you did close a really exciting deal collaboration with Eli Lilly. You referred to it before. And it sounds like, from the way you've described it, it's a great collaboration, and wouldn't suggest anything other. But as you go to doing your next deal, or thinking about your next deal, are there some things you learned from this deal that you would then apply going to future transactions in terms of how you think about your platform?
Actually, this is a very fundamental understanding that we got. When we did this deal, it happened very early, when Anima actually did not have much of a pipeline. And essentially, this was partnering on the power of the technology. So when this happens to you, the first thing that you want to do is replicate that, and you run to everybody else and you say, I've got this technology platform, bring me your targets and I'll discover drugs for you. But what we found, and this is actually something that is not well, I would say, understood by most platform companies, because you think about yourself as a technology platform. But with all the changes that happen in terms of the investors that want to invest in platform companies, I am not seeing a change with regards to I would say, the unbalanced equation between the value of assets and the value of the technology. The deals, by far, and I would say most of them, are still driven by assets that you have.
Correct.
And if you don't have any assets, you will have to do, I would say, to be very lucky. Okay, there is no other word for that, because we are talking systematically to many, many farmers, and we are now in the process of working on several deals. But what we found is that they are all driven by assets in our pipeline that those farmers are initially interested in, and then you got the therapeutic area leader that is looking at those, and you got some action going around that asset because they want it. Assets also generate competitive situations, because when there is an asset, they can evaluate it. And by the way, in COVID-19 days, where there is no physical due diligence to go and see the labs of somebody, buying an asset is a much lower risk and much lower operational, due diligence to do on a company. So if I would say one thing that is very critically important for platform companies, regardless of whether you want to go to the clinic all the way with your assets, which is a different issue altogether, okay? This is really what you see, by the way. Many platform companies, this is a kind of, say, we partner for credibility, for visibility, for validation, but we are focused on our own drugs. At Anima, we view partnering as a core business model of the company. So the applicability of the platform is so broad that if you compare two companies, just, Ionis versus Alnylam, in the RNAi, Ionis partnered all the way from the beginning, creating very, very broad pipeline with many partners, and Alnylam was focused on their own drugs. So we believe that our strategy is more like the Ionis types of companies and rather than the Alnylam, and we focus on our technology. However, we develop our assets. And when you ask about what we've done with Lilly, I would say we had no assets. We used the money from Lilly as well as our internal strategic understanding to develop many assets. And now we have a much wider front of, I would say, the most advanced program for Anima is like 10 months away from IND, but we are still preclinical, and this is generating most of the interest in with regards to deals that we are working on.
Thank you, Yochi. Adam, I actually think, you probably actually are listening to a lot of this and reflecting again from the NodThera experience, right? And I would observe that there is and thank you, that's a really good point, Yochi. I mean, it's there, right? It's pharma values assets, okay? But one of the reasons they value assets in terms of a broader collaboration is the data for those assets actually de-risk the platform, right? So, when you're working on a broad discovery platform like Adam has, targeting the inflammasome, that's front and center, right? So Adam, any thoughts on that, just to keep that going?
Yes, I mean, I think that ultimately companies have to look hard in on themselves to ask the question, what do we want to be and what are we good at, right? And I think that ultimately, we have the power of a very broad biology, but our expertise and our sweet spot and the way we will deliver value is generating molecules and assets that hold in common NLRP3 inhibition, but can be positioned for these different indications. And I think that we're building the company to deliver to the marketplace, well-credentialed, validated compounds that behave appropriately from a biological, medicinal chemistry, PK, PD standpoint. And I think we, especially in this funding environment, kind of set ourselves up very well to deliver those to the marketplace. And then there is a number of suitors that could be potentially interested in those compounds, depending on their preferences and their therapeutic area strategies, etc. I'd say a couple of things on, buyer's remorse. Two quick thoughts to consider.
Yeah, was actually seller's remorse, but you could talk about buyer's remorse too.
I've been at Sanofi and at J&J in BD roles, so I've seen it on both sides, buyers and sellers remorse. The first is that, you get caught up in the 3, 4, 5, 6 months of doing a deal. And a lot of time there's a pressure, let's just get this done, let's get the contract done, let's get the due diligence done. And really you're living with this thing for years and years potentially. So, trying to ensure that that interaction is focused on the long term and aligning incentives is just critical, not just worrying about when the contract's done and when will the upfront money come in. The second thing I'd say, especially for very early stage companies, platform companies, is just spend attention on the details, particularly around how do you define the assets that I am actually partnering with who, leaving us opportunity and clear water between what is partnered and what is not. And oftentimes, and again, with this, we need to validate that we're credible in the marketplace. You see these very broad collaborations that are tying up multiple targets across multiple therapeutic areas. And that might make a lot of sense early on, but oftentimes when you live through that and you look back and you think, wow, I wish we narrowed that so that we give open opportunity for our other opportunities in other applications for the same platform.
So that I'm going to pick up on that what is partnered and what is not. I'm going to bring Beth back into the discussion there. I think that, in working cross-platform companies, what we see time and time again, it's just every company has this challenge. Every platform company has to pivot between the risk of proving the platform, okay, and the risk of choosing the right product, okay, or the right asset development strategy, okay, so that the data you compile around the asset ideally does two things. It makes that asset look very attractive, okay, but it also conveys value to the platform. All right. So it's like that you can't separate those two. This won't apply to every company on this platform, probably won't apply to most of them, but for a lot of companies, particularly, in the active space we work in, as Sharon knows, Adaptive Cellular Therapy, the issue in so many of those companies is that everybody has a unique platform. Everybody has a different type of cell. But the reality at the end of the day is that the targeting is all towards validated targets, all right? So while we're proving the platform, unfortunately, we're not actually creating a product profile that's going to get pharma very excited, to come back to Yochi's, comments around that, right? That's a very, very important, situation where you look at your platform and you look at how you can best walk that risk line between taking double risk on novel targets and novel platforms versus actually saying, hey, my platform works. It happens to work against this target, which actually has a lot of competition. And therefore that raises a differentiation question. So Beth, to bring you into this, how early do you think these decisions should be thought of? When you're looking at platforms and you're looking at this decision as to how you walk that line between proving the platform and actually developing an attractive asset?
Well, I think, when you say how early, I think when you're still dreaming of the company, right? I think you need to start it as early as possible, because it's so fundamental to what you do next, and so to have that understanding and that strategic view for the short and long term, one needs to really think about what can my technology do best? What are my core capabilities that I can do myself? What can't I do? How do I embark on strategic collaborations, maybe peer-to-peer even initially, to try to add value? I think thinking critically about, is my platform parsable, divisible into certain categories that really do. I think Adam said, clear water or open ocean between different categories of targets or approaches or assets or indications. However, that can be reasonably divided, and that you can defend to your potential partners that those divisions are separable, that you're not going to have cannibalization of markets or pricing considerations that occur, and that you're retaining enough and incubating it long enough that you're not eroding your own value as a going concern, as a company you're trying to build. The other thing I think that is really critical to think about is oftentimes you'll see the cost of capital is cheaper for us now because of the bullish market. So that's a wonderful place to be. We have enough money to take things much further along, but we need to be spending that money, deploying that capital in the right way that's going to inflect the greatest value, and is going to give us optionality, is going to allow us to have leverage in negotiation to be able to continue that advancement ourselves. So we're not giving the control to the potential partner and having to take a bad deal because we have to. But I think also you see a lot of contingent value rights or option-based deals. And I think critically, and I have my own seller's remorse in this area, but to understand that if I am sharing investment with a partner, if I'm working with them truly collaboratively to reach later stage value inflection, and then I'm going to co-develop, co-promote, for example, I need to understand whether or not I am likely taking on more risk to try to please an unpleasable partner. Right? Because you can be churning and churning and churning at your expense and never, ever hit the value inflecting milestones because your partner has a different expectation of what those data need to look like. So be very cautious, because if you partner early, you tend to want to have more contingent value rights, but don't have those contingent value rights preclude you from actually hitting your milestones and being able to advance your programs.
Great. We only actually have a couple of minutes left here, I think 2 to 3. So rather than going deeply into any individual discussion, I'm just going to ask my panelists in terms of less of a rapid fire closing round, but just maybe a minute of thoughtful reflection on what we've heard today. I'll probably use moderator's prerogative in the last minute to wrap it up. But any thinking about this discussion, does this discussion, are these the kinds of discussions we need to be having more? Does this advance the thinking this way? How critical is this to, I think not all of you are the CEO of your companies, several are, but you're all very, very busy. And if you're in the role of CEO of a biotech company, I've heard people ask me if I think they're ready to be CEO of a biotech company. And I'm like, do you want to feel like the one-man band who has to play 400 instruments and none of them particularly well? It's one of the hardest jobs because of all the things that you have to master to de-risk companies. And now we bring this partnering thing to a much, much earlier stage, where in the early days, we may have been wondering, we were doing mundane things like CMC and also very importantly, securing our IP and all these other things. And now we're forcing this discussion earlier, just like we're forcing the discussion of market access and pricing and reimbursement and all these things that I think, present sort of the weight on a lot of these companies, which sort of counterbalances the immense potential that they have. So anybody just have any thoughts around how this might be working out at your company and where you kind of see this going next in terms of partnering? I don't expect you to discuss specific deals unless you want to, but we'll just go in the order we've been going on. So I'll start with Yochi first, and we'll go through everybody.
I'll say that the most important thing to understand about partnering is that this is a long process with each individual partner, and it's a very time-consuming process. Mm-hmm. If you want to be successful with that, you need to be very systematic about it. this is not something that will happen just by itself. So if you have, I'm a CEO, I have my VP of Business Development, and he is actually working on our pipeline of partnering. He is actually creating opportunities and moving them very systematically. We have data packages that are created for each step of the, I would say, interest level of the partner. And we also require from them things in return, like bring the head of the therapeutic area, you know, if you want to actually be able to see our data room and things like that. So you have to be very systematic in this process and to work on many, many partnering opportunities at the same time in different stages. Have data that is structured by the stage of the discussion. So you disclose it one step at a time, which is moving the dialogue forward and brings in higher level executives from the pharma. And at the same time, focus on developing your pipeline. And I fully agree with what Beth said. That pipeline has to validate your strategy and the platform, but has to have value of its own. Like in our case, CMYC is a great target, undruggable of all times. We've got a program in that. Collagen 1 in fibrosis or Huntington disease, where we identify inhibitors of just the mutant and not the wild type protein. Things like that that create validation, but are very valuable on themselves.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'll hand it over to Adam and I'll let Sharon bring us home. We have about 3 minutes left.
Yeah, so a very similar theme. I think that for me, it is to be purposeful in your partnering intentions and strategy. Align that early with the board. What type of company you're trying to build? When is the right time to partner these assets on what data set with what relative value that you're expecting in the marketplace? What is your core competency and how you're going to deliver that? But at the same time, the pharma interactions are a near constant. Even if you're not planning to partner until later, you know, don't make the expectation that you can just stay within the company and suddenly come out and reveal, you know, a great story. I think there is a lot of interaction that occurs even without the explicit intent to partner now, and that needs to be managed. That's a lot of time and effort that the internal company needs to spend, even if there isn't a direct, you know, meaningful, you know, deliverable, you know, in terms of a BD deal immediately. So, you know, we've got to balance those things in addition to running the business, and that's always the tension, and keeping the board pleased and looking for new investors. So there's always a dynamic tension between all those things. But I think that pharma partnering is core within those other elements that you need to stay on top of to run a successful company.
And can I just add one comment to what Adam just said? I think it's very important to have those discussions, even if you're not intending to partner. I think you're talking with pharma from a position of strength, because you're not actually needing to partner with them at that stage, but you're learning so much because they're your ultimate customer. So to listen to what they think inflects value, to listen to what they need before they would do a deal, because you should bring that back. This feedback loop is so essential to you thinking strategically and preparing your assets for eventual partnering. And of course, you know, then when you're ready to partner, it helps accelerate that process as well.
Thanks. Sharon?
Absolutely. Just to round it out, I think it needs to be a proactive, opportunistic BD strategy that is at the core of, again, as we said, creating value for the company. I think it's also a cost-benefit analysis and being very, very clear on the risks, depending on the biotech stage that one is willing to make. And so it's really driving to ultimately, partnering is here to stay. Historically, and you said it at your opening, Ed, pharma needs innovation, is hungry for innovation. There was a lot of acquisitions historically, and now biotech has plenty of capital to have a long runway. And so it's a symbiotic ecosystem that we're building to partner also, importantly, selectively, to maximize the value of especially platform companies where there's multiple opportunities and shots on goal.
I think that was a great way, Sharon, to wrap us up and to take us to the close. And thank you. I want to thank all the panelists for what I think is a really in-depth and pretty specific discussion of such a critical function for early stage innovative platform companies. And hopefully this resonates with those of you and who have had the opportunity to listen, and hope to continue the dialogue. So thank you again. I'm going to hand it back over to Josh.
Fantastic, thanks, Ed. Fantastic discussion there. I feel like it kind of gone on for much longer. Lots of great issues delved into, and some great case studies there. As Ed said, please do continue the conversation. The chat and Q&A functions on the right-hand side of the video here will remain open for the whole of the 2 weeks of the event. So if you do have any questions, or indeed want to connect with any of the panelists or with Cello, please do so. We are back at 2 o'clock now with our next panel, which nicely follows on from this, focusing on early stage partnering and the strategies of some of the large pharma players in the space. So with that, a huge thank you to Yochi, to Adam, to Beth, Sharon, and to Ed as our host. Please do also visit the Cello booth in the partnering area, and use another way to reach out and connect with them. See you all again at 2 o'clock. Thank you.